Hey guys, and welcome back to my Dead by Daylight weapons series. And as I'm sure you already noticed from that fabulous intro, today's weapon is the Plague Profane Censer. How freaking cool is this? So I am super excited to finally be getting back to this, and there was no better weapon to make a comeback with than this baby right here. It's arguably one of the coolest weapons in the game because it's not really a weapon, it's like an incense dispenser, but you know, it's pretty cool to, you know, bash survivors over the head with this. And on top of that, for those of you that don't know the Plague, her power is projectile vomit. You're welcome for not having that in the intro. As before, this video and this whole series have been sponsored by Coscom Cosplay Supplies. They provided almost all of the materials to put this baby together, so definitely check them out. Definitely buy some foam because conventions are coming back. They are, so you need foam, you need supplies, go buy some. Go right now, I'll wait. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first step here was to pattern a relatively complicated shape. For all my 3D modelers out there, I will learn someday, I promise. But for now, I went with an old school miniature pattern. You can find the link for this pattern in the description below. Once the pattern was all cut, I started with the main shapes. This required a lot of monotonous tracing and cutting. I used Coscom's high density EVA foam for the entire project because I really wanted to put it to the test for a very complicated shape. For these main pieces, I used a 4mm thickness. Using a very sharp knife, I cut out all the pieces. Almost all of the edges should be cut at a 45-degree bevel. My trick for smooth bevels is to use my pinky knuckle as like a kickstand that I can then drag along. The cleaner these lines are, the better your final seams will be. Clean seams are happy seams. With all of the pieces cut out, it's time for the details. Piece number 2 is just a simple cutout. These edges can be easily cleaned up if your cuts are a little sloppy like mine. For piece number 6, I used a stone bit for my Dremel to carve slight hollows for added dimension. For the remaining pieces, you'll need to be very precise with the knife work. I replaced my blade frequently for this. To achieve the set-in look of these pieces, you'll need to preserve the cutout as well as the interior space so that the cutout can be pressed in and then glued. I used gap-filling super glue, but I would recommend a more flexible glue such as hot glue for this. When fully assembled, the glue cracked in areas of high stress and I had to touch it up a lot. It did the job, but now you can do better. Now for the assembly. Since this foam is high density, it helps to warm the pieces up with a heat gun before gluing them together. This allows for much tighter curves. Or you can use Coscom's regular EVA foam. I'm just extra and I'm in love with this high density foam. And once again, there has never been a better time to take your time. The cleaner these seams are, the prettier they will look. So really take your time and line up those edges. Look at all these beautiful sections and nice pretty seams because I actually took my time for once. For the stacking process, I made a few adjustments. I started with attaching sections 2 and 3 since this is the weirdest spot. When gluing this area, I strategically tried to straighten out these edges because I thought it looked better. For most of these sections, it's a simple attachment, bevel to bevel. But the gap between section 3 and 4 was a little wonky. So I made a little bridge piece with the same foam, and this allowed me to kind of fill in the gap between these two pieces, and it also allowed me to better straighten out the tiers that attach to it. And I thought this gave a much nicer finished edge. The rest of the sections are simple, just contact cement, a little heat for shaping, and squish them into place. well on the way to bashing people over the head. I worked on the top section next. It was a little intimidating at first given all the complex shapes, but it really helps to break it down into smaller chunks. I made some nice foam blocks and then rough carved them into shape with a box cutter. Then I took it to the Dremel for further refinement with my sanding drum. For the detail rings on this piece, I used a foam scrap cutout as a stencil to get as close to perfect circles as I could manage. The pen was not the best choice for this, obviously. I tested a few different things here because I wasn't sure which would look nicer. I was able to cut a nice clean line with my X-Acto knife, but when I opened it up with the heat gun, it opened up my seams, which I probably should have expected. So for the rest of the details, I went back in with my wood burning tool. It was much harder to get a clean straight line this way, but the result still looks pretty cool. And I was able to clean up the mess I made of my seams with just a little quick seal. I followed these same steps for all the other accent pieces, lots of carving and sanding. Next up was the most annoying piece by far. I used some super thick high density foam to get the proper shape, and then I glued them so that they curved downward. I also added some more bulk to the points of the prong things. It's also worth noting that one of the prongs is intentionally broken. And then it's time to literally sand forever. Seriously, look at my hands. Then I finalized the bottom with some foam clay to fill in the gaps. And then I went back in and cut the prongs off because they looked weird and they weren't long enough. Now it looks more spidery and less drone-like. Last but not least were these handle-looking thingies. My first instinct was to make them hollow for some reason, and this speaks to my nature of always making things unnecessarily difficult. So do the smart thing instead and just cut some square strips. The curve just looks way nicer. The only thing left for these pieces was a few little accent bits. The foam work was finished with an even Dremel texturing across all the pieces. Then I cleaned up any weird spots with foam clay or quick seal. Now it's time to assemble. This is definitely the most satisfying part of the process, so take your time and enjoy it. You've earned it. And now for the really fun stuff. Behold, the teeny weeny portable fog machine as designed by the amazing Coscom Cosplay. I was really inspired by her video on how to build this little fog machine, and since I'm kind of new in the world of electronics, this seemed like a really great learning opportunity for me. I will also note that it is much louder than I expected, but overall, it's an awesome little setup and it only cost me about $60. I then retrofitted the parts into the top of the sensor, which was a little tricky. I decided to make a sort of shelf to hold the battery pack and the vaporizer, and I carved out a space to fit everything nicely under the topper piece. I then secured the switch in the final covering piece and attached it all with neodymium magnets. After that, I gave the whole prop 3 good coats of Plastidip, and now it's time for paint. Oh wait, never mind. I made the last minute decision to add LEDs too, because why not? I didn't have any orange LEDs, so I wired together 2 yellow and 1 red LED to a 3-volt battery, and I had to use parallel circuits because a series connection doesn't work when the voltage of your red and yellow LEDs is greater than the 3-volt battery. That's what I get for looking at a blue LED schematic and not realizing the difference. And then I made another secret compartment at the bottom to hold everything. Now we get to the paint. For this, I used a mixture of Createx airbrush paints, a pearlized gold, and a transparent brown. This is just what I happened to have already, and it was actually a pretty nice color. I applied about 2 coats, but it didn't really want to dry because of how humid it is where I am. But a little heat from a hairdryer literally dried it instantly, which was great. For the weathering, I used a reddish brown wash to help emphasize all the detail lines. It's amazing the difference a little bit of watery paint can make. I also added some smears and drips that made it look kind of rusty. Last but not least is the blood. I went back to my original blood recipe that I used for my Huntress axe, which is a heavy body Pyro red paint, navy blue craft paint, and triple thick gloss coating. There's not really an exact ratio to this, I've done it differently every single time, but I have found that this is a good consistency for splattering and dripping. Oh, and we can't forget a little foam dust to add some extra texture-y bits. After a quick coat of gloss varnish, it's time to make a huge mess. I started off with the usual brush flicking method, but I wasn't getting the best splatters, so eventually I ended up dunking my fingers in the paint and flicking it absolutely everywhere. And yes, I am wearing a trash bag. Once the blood was all dried, I went back in and added some more gloss coating to make it look extra juicy, and now she is complete. So that about wraps it up, guys. I'm so thrilled with how this turned out. It took absolutely forever, but I used the extra time to really make this as cool as I possibly could. I added lots of special effects, obviously. We got some LEDs, we got some fog. I'm just in love with this one. It's just so cool. It's so different. I've made a lot of very basic melee weapons, but like this takes the cake as far as melee weapons go. I mean, it just does. But I must thank you all for your immense support and for continuing to watch my videos, because they give me life. This is about the most fun thing I've ever tried to do, is just make stuff and hopefully teach other people how to make cool stuff. So if you enjoyed this video, if you found this video helpful, if you want to see more videos like this, please interact with it in some fashion. Likes, comments, shares, all that fun stuff. And if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, because I like to have subscribers. And once again, this video was sponsored by Coscom Cosplay Supplies. If you haven't tried any of their foam yet, I'm not sure what you're doing, but the time has come. Please go get some. Oh, and I finally have an affiliate code for them. So now you can get a nice little discount if you buy their stuff using the affiliate code linked in the description below. And of course, as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you can't figure out how to print my patterns, go ahead and leave a comment or send me a message, whatever you need to do. I'm working on it, I'm sorry. But until next time, stay tuned for awesome. Oh, and for those of you that may have been wondering, yes, I am still covered in latex. It's gonna be a very long shower, because, you know, I put latex in like all of my arm hair. Wish me luck, I guess.